Hey guys, I mean, there's never a bad time to talk about death groups, so let's just get this death group's best of worst that I've been talking about for so long out of the way. If you're not aware, death groups are an experimental hip-hop trio consisting of MC Ride, Zach Hill, and Andy Morin. They also kind of combine elements in their music of industrial rock, noise rock, glitch hop, other various styles of electronic music. They very much have their own specific sound and style carved out, but at the same time every single one of their releases has its own approach. Death Grip's lyrics do tend to be very cutthroat and violent at times, but also nihilistic and bleak, and they kind of just, to me, represent a mind going through a downward spiral of pain and chaos. Or they kind of just strike me as every vile and disgusting part of the human mind laid out in a very abstract way. Their specific terminology at times can seem even a little bit random or very esoteric and difficult to decipher, but if you do spend the time, you can extract some meaning behind most of what MC Ride says. And I think one of the most interesting things about death grips is just based on their public interactions with fans and the press and everything, it's very clear that they don't really take this whole game very seriously. They're kind of just fucking around, but they do give many shits about their art and their craft, which I really respect. They technically started with their self-titled EP in 2011, but later dropped the mixtape Ex-Military, so I'm only going to be counting like full-length projects in this ranking from best to worst, and of course all of this is my own opinion. Okay, number one for me is The Powers That Be. This includes both discs. I'm not going to be separating them just because they are both at the top for me anyway, so I don't want to have to make that distinction. I find this double album to be their most cohesive, boundary-pushing, and utterly mind-blowing release to date. The first disc has a very twitchy incorporation of looped Bjork samples that create a very gorgeous and somber undertone to it. I find the detail in this album to be utterly mind-blowing and very overwhelming to try to explain or review. When I was sitting down to write notes on this thing, it was really difficult, but I find every single decision here for the most part to make perfect sense to push this to the breaking point of experimentation while still maintaining that verse-chorus structure. Up My Sleeves has a lovely opening moment at the start of the cut where the Bjork samples just kind of slowly envelop it and draw us in, and this track ranges from momentary explosions and energy to sort of calmer and more droney moments in the interlude. Really great opening track, and then Billy Not Really is in my top 10, maybe even like top 5 Death Grips tracks, period. It uses all of these various dazzling synth melodies and jumps to different parts pretty rapidly, but the transitions are seamless. Just how many subtle changes and embellishments this thing works in is crazy to me, and lyrically it's a pretty abstract way to describe existential dread, which again does pop up a lot in Death Grips lyrics. Say Hey Kid kind of continues this glitchy wash of synths and drum machines, but it gets calmer in the chorus, which is definitely a much needed break from the jumpiness of the rest of the tracks. And the way the samples are chopped in Have a Sad Come Baby is fucking insane, next to this rattling percussion and kind of like this robotic vocal effect that's very off-putting. Voila is another totally manic and batshit crazy one with skittering drums and samples in the refrain, and a lot of suspense is built in the verses with a number of different phases. The only song here that I would cut is Fuck Me Out, and that's for one reason. I have seen people throw out the take that this album is kind of repetitive with its sampling and just the song structures and whatnot, and just the sporadic nature of it. It's a lot to consume at once. I personally disagree pretty strongly overall. However, this song is the one that kind of feeds just a touch to that, and it pisses me off for that reason. I don't extract anything from this that I couldn't get from the other songs here. So yeah, screw Fuck Me Out, but other than that, I would consider this a little over a 9 out of 10. And moving on to Jenny Death, which just feels like getting caught in the web of torment and chaos that is MC Ride's mind. The live instrumentation on this thing creates a very gritty and bulky, somewhat washed out sound for sure. It's an extremely dense album. This is the closest thing Death Grips have ever come to creating a very punchy, like, punk rock album, but even just classifying it as that feels so wrong. You really just have to lay ears on the specific genre blending that they have to understand it. The sentiments behind this record will genuinely make you sick if you're paying attention, but they do feel very grossly accurate to how the mind kind of functions when it's in this state of being. I Break Mirrors with My Face in the United States is an incredible opener. I love how the drums and synths and bass all just crash in and overtake it. Ride's speedy and cutthroat delivery on this thing is absolutely sick too. Great opening track, and then from there we get Inanimate Sensation, which definitely creates this sense of impending impact with the ascending synths that follow the vocal inflection. There are some like pitch changes and other weird embellishments to the synths as they kind of flow through it. And then moving on, the wash of gritty instrumentation on Turned Off just reaches heights. The sheer punch and bulk of the drums and bass on this thing are absolutely insane, and then some of the most cryptic of the whole album's lyrics show up here. Bro, I'm lighting cigarettes in the shower, like holy. And then you've got similarly packed and uncompromising moments like Why a Bitch Gotta Lie and the title track here, the former of which, the way the drums and bass just kind of rip through this thing are absolutely earth-shattering. Then you've got the screaming vocal inflections worked in and the robotic vocal effect ripping through it as well. It is just high impact the whole way, baby, and it also samples Guillotine pretty tastefully. And then you've got the super explosive cut, the powers that be, and the way the blaring synthesizers are used in this thing totally reminds me of how they interacted with each other on like Inanimate Sensation. It's another lyrical highlight for sure as well. The powers that be, in my interpretation, seems to be some sort of like life force, and MC Ride is saying that it's in his hands and he has the power to create or destroy his own being at his will. Centuries of Damn has also grown into be one of my favorite tracks. I think that the sheer power combined with the slower tempo of the kind of lead guitar melody that creeps through this thing creates for a very haunting effect. And with On GP, it feels almost ridiculous not to bring up the lyrics. I think that the way that Ride addresses this and really just lays it all out in such a blunt manner makes it all the more heartbreaking. He didn't really need to say anything very elaborate or profound on this topic. It's just like, this is what's happening and it's heartbreaking. And while you might think that Death Grips 2.0 is kind of like an unnecessary detour at the end of the album that didn't really need to be there, I couldn't disagree more, and hear me out on why. I kind of see this as like a metaphor for the fact that you can be vividly suicidal one moment and the next, if you don't go through with ending your life, you kind of just have to keep living, whether you like it or not, when you're in this state of mind. And you're gonna be a little bit more spaced and confused and not really know how to approach life in the same way that you did. So this track doesn't strike me as necessarily like a specifically happy or sad ending to the narrative. It's just kind of like, okay, just kind of gotta keep living because life just keeps going. So yeah, Jenny Death I would probably consider to be about a 9.5 out of 10. Maybe more on the side of a 9, I don't know, we'll decide when I finalize things on my album of the year account, but anywho, moving on. We've got Bottomless Pit next up. This is Death Grips proving that they can still push boundaries, they can still release an album that's extremely dense with experimentation and different ideas, but at the same time it's very catchy and easy to listen to. And it is very much like an even combination between all of the different styles that Death Grips have dabbled in up until this point, but just pushed a little bit further. And the highs on this thing reach levels that I think no other Death Grips songs have up until this point. Primary first example being Giving Bad People Good Ideas. It's got this ominous vocal inflection in the beginning, and then it's just this twitchy explosion of guitar and drum. It really represents all of the chaos that you're getting yourself into with this album, and MC Ride's delivery on this thing is also relentless. And I mean, how does he even MC Ride this beat? I feel similarly about Hothead, which is just a schizoid industrial wave of chaos from the way the drums are mixed and the vocals are incorporated and the bass is worked in the beginning. And the spikes, oh my god, it's skittish and catchy with frantic drumming and bass and a descending synth melody in the chorus. It combines like the accessible, organized money store side of Death Grips with just the right amount of power to floor you. I wanted to mention 3 Bedrooms in a Good Neighborhood purely for the fact that this hook is stellar alongside its very dizzying beat. And then you've got Ring a Bell, another very well-crafted whirlwind of blaring bass and drum and a kind of a twangy synth melody in the hook. And then you've got 80808, which is one of the tamer cuts, at least for this album, with various wispy and polished synth melodies. In terms of cuttable moments, two songs that I feel are not necessarily as blood-pumping as the rest of the album are Bubbles Buried in This Jungle and Warping, both kind of cuts that have always been a little bit on the sidelines to me with the listening experience of this album, but at the same time, they're definitely not bad songs. I also kind of instinctually want to say although where this comes in the progression of the album makes for kind of a nice come down moment from the rest of the chaos, and it kind of calls back to a moment like Get Got off the Money Store, which was very successful, so I have mixed feelings on it, but overall I'm alright with it being here. And yeah, I think I'm gonna slap a 9 on this thing overall. Pretty hard to find flaws in it. It kind of strikes me as like the Money Store 2.0, but with beefier and more abrasive production. And moving on right from there into the Money Store, this is one of the most instantly consumable and catchy records to hip-hop fans. I would assume there are plenty of memorable hooks on this thing. It's kind of incredible how tightly crafted and cohesive this thing is while still maintaining that dark, disturbing edge that Death Grips has. And there's so many Death Grips classics on this thing. If a Death Grips song were to be like a radio single, they would probably all be off of this album. Let's start with Lost Boys, which has grown into be one of my favorite Death Grips songs, period, as well. Kind of an anthem for the outsiders and lawbreakers that MC Rad feels he belongs to. And if I were to try to turn someone on to Death Grips, I would probably play them either The Fever or Hustle Bones, especially Hustle Bones. Oh my god, the distorted bass and percussion in this thing and those washes of vocal samples are absolutely infectious. And I feel like I've Seen Footage is one of the more expansive beats here. You've got the blaring bass and a lot of little embellishments and that panting sample that creates a very ominous effect. And this footage pretty much references all that MC Rad has witnessed in the streets, and his delivery gets really passionate in the hook, which is a great touch. Double-Helix is like the most haunting and hypnotic that this album gets, with that ringing melody and vocal sample, and then you've got I've Seen Footage, which samples a tennis match and a train, I believe it is. Hacker is just glitchy and skittish in all of the right ways. I think it's very underrated in the grand scheme of Death Grips songs. You've got the rattling drums and the odd synth melodies and just an incredible buildup of energy in the hook. So yes, The Money Store is one of Death Grips' smoothest and most cohesive releases, but I think that they have reached greater highs than are seen on The Money Store. No song like knocks me flat necessarily. I mean, you got System Blower and Hacker and whatnot, but I'm never like, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening right now, blown away, which is why I think it's about at an 8.5 for me. And then we have You're the Snitch up next, which just came out. I have not disclosed any public opinions on how I feel about this album, but you know, spoiler alert, I really like it. This is probably Death Grips' most abstract release, both lyrically and sonically. It kind of just comes across to me as like this splurge of different ideas and experiments. It's like taking a dive into the depths of MC Rad's mind that are completely sporadic. Like, it kind of reminds me of some sort of old-fashioned surrealism or something. And there are so many layers to the production here at all times. Like, wow. This and Ex-Military, I think, are probably some of Death Grips' most sample-heavy albums. And the flow of this album works in such an unexpected way, but I do feel there were a few missteps that kind of prevent it from landing higher on my list. Death Grips' Online is a great opening track, one of my favorite opening Death Grips songs ever, to be honest. You've got the synth arpeggio that creeps through it, the background vocals, the lead wailing, like kind of lo-fi melody, and then you've got the record scratching, which pops up quite a bit in the rest of this album, as does MC Rad's experimentation with different flows. And then we've got Flies and Black Paint, which both of them had kind of a similar effect on me when they were dropped as singles. They both feel like they could be 8-minute songs just based on the sheer amount of detail they pack in, but they're only 2 to 3. With Flies, you've got the skittish drums and the various jumpy synth melodies and the record scratching again. I could see how you would think that this is a high point for this album, but to me it does come across as kind of obnoxious sometimes, just because I really can't make sense of how sporadic the production is here. Still though, it is a pretty big, ambitious moment for the record that I appreciate for that alone. And then you've got Black Paint, which feels like kind of a song off of Jenny Death, but a little more refined, this time from the killer lead guitar melody to the earth-shattering drums and awesome climax. And then you've got various synths and background vocals worked in there as well, and the lyrics are pretty abstract, but they do deal in some satanic references as well. This record also includes like these fast bursts of energy that kind of serve as interludes like Shit Show and the horn section, which are very jolty and definitely shock you into listening closer. And Ha 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 has one of the most unique soundscapes I've heard on any Death Grips track. It samples a lot of their previous material together in this kind of lo-fi odyssey. It also has one of my favorite hooks of theirs. Shrieky and Dilemma are both very catchy songs with lead melodies that you can pretty easily catch on to, and again kind of serve as a break to all of this chaos. And Disappointed is a song where MC Ride kind of experiments with different flows and vocal approaches. However, I'm not really into Little Richard at all. Just none of the soundscape, especially the vocal effects, appeals to me. Mixed feelings on Linda's in Custody as well. I don't think it's as abysmal as I've heard some people think it is. At least it has a strong lyrical idea behind it. Overall, I did come away from You're the Snitch enjoying it. Overall, it's probably about an 8 to me. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely left me confused, and I think I still need to let this record sit a little bit more with me, but if I had to guess, it would probably be here in my progression. No Love Deep Web is next. I find this album to honestly be kind of underestimated in the grand scheme of Death Grips. I like the fact that this is more tightly refined and skeletal and tame compared to their other releases. A nice switch coming down from the very bombastic and explosive nature of the rest of them. It makes use of a lot of different distorted synth melodies and bouncy bass. Energy-wise, it is a little bit more rigid throughout entire progressions, but that makes the unsettling nature of the production and the intensity of Ride's delivery and the lyrics stand out that much more. It starts off with Come Up and Get Me, which lyrically I could interpret as MC Ride being trapped on a building, like a lot of them suggest, or some of them kind of lead me to believe that he also could be contemplating suicide on top of this building. Either way, it definitely sets off the very ominous tone of this record, and it is a very bass-heavy song with a lot of different tasteful pitch switches. Little Boy is almost kind of elegant for a Death Grips song. It's got all of these different twitchy and polished synth melodies as well as bouncy bass synths. And No Love is a song that's very personally important to me. It's definitely high up there in my favorite Death Grips songs, period. The sheer power and conviction of the instrumentation as well as the lyrics is pretty undeniable. It starts with these very unrelenting, wailing synths, and then the percussion just crashes in. It gets more minimal for part of the verses. Also, it has one of the most detailed and infectious hooks of any Death Grips song. I also love Lock Your Doors. The mechanical vocal sample adds a lot to this. It works in this wall of textures. It definitely creates a very foreboding atmosphere. And Bass Rattle Stars Out the Sky is definitely the high point that this album needed after a chunk of songs that I feel were kind of somewhat bordering on B-sidey around the latter half of this album. It has these vivid descriptions of all Ride, witnesses the level of high that he is. It has a very memorable hook and a delivery with just the right amount of punch. And Artificial Death in the West is the last track. Hell yeah, I love the way the synthesizers ooze out into this eerie flood on this track. But yeah, I do think songs like Hunger Games and Deep Web could have been approached with just a little bit more care, although I do like the way that Deep Web kind of addresses the anonymous nature of the internet and how that can very easily lead to trolling and just utter fuckery. It's kind of a topic that Death Grips have addressed before and definitely plays into their image very well. So I'm feeling an 8 on this thing, and moving right along, we've got Ex-Military, their grittiest, most lo-fi, probably most sample-heavy album. So yes, even though this is one of my least favorite Death Grips albums, I do think that there are redeeming qualities to almost every single song here, like really any other Death Grips project. I'm pleased that they were able to refine their sound and go in a number of different directions from here, but I do respect this as, kind of the point where they broke out and just kind of screwed with people's heads in a way with this very unique and boundary-pushing sound. To me, this album just has the greatest amount of missteps in its production of any other album of theirs, but Beware is my favorite Death Grips song, period, so at least they pulled that one off for sure for me. It starts off with that Charles Manson sample, and then we've got that sheer power of very strung out guitar instrumental and a sample worked in really tastefully as well. And these verses are honestly life-changing to hear, in my opinion. I think that this is some of the best writing I've ever seen on any Death Grips song. And then we've got Guillotine, a song that I have kind of wrestled with my feelings on through the years, but I think I've come to the conclusion that I like it. The structure of it is really odd. It has these crashing metallic sounds followed by spacey portions where Ride works in some verses. There are some embellishments here and there and whatnot, and the synths really erupt towards the end. It's a very much needed climax for this thing, and I'm glad it was included. It makes it a little bit more easy to consume. Lord of the Game is a clear takeaway from this album for me as well. There's a lot of attention to detail in the production. The samples are incorporated really tastefully. The guest vocalist works out really well for this song as well. I mean, Death Grips haven't gotten a lot of vocal features on many of their songs before. This is one of the few, but it definitely played out in their favor. And then you've got the very grimy bass and drum at the center of Tachyon and Ride's very manic vocal delivery. And I like the fact that Culture Shock is a critique on modern day society and culture, especially in terms of technology, and I like the grimy synth chords incorporated into this thing as well. But here's my list of problems with Ex-Military, starting with Spread Eagle Across the Block. The sample at the forefront of this production, the guitar just does not do much for me at all. It gets old really fast, and I just wish there was something more gripping or creative about it. It does have a few different manipulations here and there to make the song passable for me, but yeah, overall definitely not a huge fan. And then we've got Through the Walls, which has a few redeeming qualities. You've got Zach Hill's drumming on this track, and also the lyrics, which do carry the very cutthroat vocabulary and suicidal tendencies of a typical Death Grips song. Again, done pretty well. But the production to me just comes across as like abysmally obnoxious. So yeah, and then there's I Want It, I Need It, and it's pretty hard not to think that this song goes on for too long. And Clink is a song that I really want to like, but overall the way that the samples and all the synths and the bass and shit just crash together in this song in such a claustrophobic way is really unpleasing to me. Like, I'm really not into the mixing of this song. So again, there are still clear highlights to this thing, and while as a 12-year-old in 2011 I was not deeply invested into really weird experimental music yet, I can imagine how great it would be to receive something like this for the first time, so respect. Alright, lastly, we've got Government Plates, an album that is less focused on lyrics and verses, and a little more attention is paid to synth melodies and hooks. But this is sort of ironic considering they're not really that expansive of beats in the first place. I wish they were a little bit more unpredictable because a lot of these songs at times get slightly repetitive and almost irritating. Still, there are a few songs that I enjoy. First of all, one of the album's darker cuts, You Might Think He Loves You, with the killer distorted bass part and Ride's very hurried and swift flow. It sets the tone off of the record pretty well, but again, I do kind of wish the track was a bit beefier, but whatever. Moving on with Anne Bonny and Two Heavens, I get pretty similar reactions from each of these. They both use various synth melodies that sound pretty catchy and elegant at times, especially with Two Heavens. And peak energy from a sonic standpoint is in This Is Violence Now, a song that would still be like mid-tier in my favorite songs to least favorite songs of this record, but again, I do think that the just sheer shock value of the song is enough to carry it and make it worth talking about. I'm Overflow has a lot of layers of synths and twitchy vocals that I enjoy quite a bit, and the clear takeaway from this album is the last track, Fuck Who's Watching, which I think is fantastic. It's got an explosive beat, a killer delivery from MC Ride. It's really high energy just the whole way through, and then it transitions into a more somber part with all of these skittering vocal manipulations and multiple phases. However, I did want to take this opportunity to rip on Birds, a song which I don't understand how people enjoy. To me, just the vocal manipulations and the way they trudge along are so awkward next to the synth melodies. The title track has both a very mechanical and woozy feel to it, but again, it's so repetitive. It's just such a copy-paste type song. But yeah, despite there not being many blaringly obvious bad moments on this album, I don't really come back to any of the songs here besides the final one, so I feel like giving it more than a 6 just wouldn't make any sense. But yeah, I know a lot of people are really into Government Plates, so I would still definitely give this thing a listen if you are into Death Grips' sound. It's just not really for me. But yeah, thank you so much for watching my ranking of Death Grips' albums from best to worst. We got fucking The Powers That Be, Bottomless Pit, The Money Store, You're the Snitch, No Love, Deep Web, Ex-Military, and Government Plates. Yeah, please subscribe to my channel, stick around, there will be a review of the new Death Heaven and Lodic albums probably pretty soon, so if you want to see those, I would hit the subscribe button. And yeah, thank you to anyone who subscribed from Anthony, appreciate that tons. you're the man, Anthony. If for some reason you just watched this whole video, probably not, but yeah, I am extremely grateful for you guys, and you know, if you want some good music conversation, I promise that I will be giving that to you very soon. So yeah, see you next time.